Hearing that, we're all probably like, yeah, duh. Hey everyone, welcome back to Do What You Can for the People, the show that nobody asked for. I'm your host, Nicole, and this episode is different. No guest, just me, and I'm really excited today to talk to you about something that has been, quite frankly, pissing me off: greenwashing. In case you missed it, earlier this month there was a pretty big scandal in the world of sustainable packaging. Innisfree, a cosmetic brand, got called out for misleading customers with a new product rollout and packaging that featured "I am paper bottle" in big bold letters. People were stoked about an all paper bottle for beauty products. They were like, the future is now. And everything was great until a customer photo revealed that the paper bottle was in fact just a paper casing on a plastic bottle. To add insult to injury, Innisfree doubled down and responded with, "We overlooked the possibility that the naming could mislead people to think that the whole packaging is made of paper. We apologize for failing to deliver in a precise way." And I'm calling bullshit because how? How could you overlook that possibility? Which room of people sat down together and agreed, yes, this is good. "I am paper bottle" is perfectly clear that what we really mean is paper casing around a plastic bottle. This is a pretty clear case of greenwashing to me, but it's not always so obvious. So I'm going to do what I can to help you, the people, spot and avoid common greenwashing traps. Let's get into it. So what is greenwashing? Investopedia defines greenwashing as the process of conveying a false impression or providing misleading information about how a company's products are more environmentally sound. Greenwashing is considered an unsubstantiated claim to deceive consumers into believing that a company's products are environmentally friendly. For example, companies involved in greenwashing behavior might make claims that their products are made from recycled materials or have energy-saving benefits. Although some of the environmental claims might be partially true, companies engaged in greenwashing typically exaggerate their claims and benefits in an attempt to mislead consumers. Greenwashing is becoming increasingly common as going green is so trendy these days. And here on this channel, you know we like to throw facts and figures at it, so let's do that. According to a 2019 Forbes report, 62% of Gen Z prefer to buy from sustainable brands. Going back as far as 2015, a Nielsen report found that 73% of millennials are willing to pay more for sustainable goods. These numbers are only going up. And with millennials and Gen Z taking a hold of global spending, it's hard to ignore and highly tempting for brands. But rushing to tap into that spending power and entering the market with green goods and services puts brands at a high risk of greenwashing. Sustainability is tough. There is no silver bullet. We know this. So if you as a brand haven't fully thought through your product and system design, the risk of greenwashing only increases. We also know that consumer trust is everything, and one thing that Gen Zers and millennials cannot abide by is being lied to and taken for a ride. The risk of greenwashing can truly ruin your reputation as a brand. As someone who works in sustainable packaging, this is really important to me because so much of this greenwashing happens on labels for shelf appeal. Consumers are drawn to buzzwords like cruelty-free, organic, non-toxic, and advertising sustainability benefits directly on your packaging makes you stand out from all your competitors when shoppers are faced with a wall of seemingly similar products. So now that we've talked about what greenwashing is and why brands are at a high risk of engaging in it, let's dive into the types of greenwashing. Green and Thistle put out an article highlighting the 7 types of greenwashing, and I think they did a pretty bang up job. I'm going to walk you through them and I'll add some thoughts and examples along the way. The first one I want to talk about is imagery, and this is when ads and product labels use nature, animals, or even just the color green around their products. This can give consumers the feeling that the product is more eco-friendly and gives brands that competitive edge when consumers are making those split-second decisions. It's pretty straightforward, and you can see how that has the potential to mislead. It's not great, But it's not the worst form of greenwashing unless you start combining it with some of the other types that we're going to get into. The next one I want to talk about is what's called clickbait. And this is what our dear friends at Innisfree engaged in. I like to call it straight up Liza Minnelli, and I think it's the worst kind of greenwashing. It's when ads or labels have information that is completely untrue, but clickbait you into buying it. It's again another pretty straightforward form of greenwashing, but more often than not, the consumer has no idea that they've been lied to until after they've already purchased the product. The only piece of good news here is that if a brand is found to be straight up lying, they've likely tarnished their reputation and lost at least one customer. But with the way information spreads these days, they're likely to lose hundreds or thousands of customers. I say good news because this is a pretty clear-cut form of greenwashing. As we dive into the next few types, the lines start to get a little bit blurry. Next, let's talk about the bait and switch. And this is when a company creates a small product or product line that is eco-friendly to draw customers into their store, but usually jacks up the price on that product or line. This tactic makes the overall brand look good and encourages a consumer to buy something to support a brand that is seemingly doing some good in the world. Using this tactic, however, puts a brand at risk for simply trying to tap new customer segments. It raises the suspicion that maybe they don't actually want to be a sustainable business. They just see a revenue opportunity because eco trends are on the up and up. Again, not the worst, but highly sus. Next up on the list is irrelevant claims, and these include things around chemical use, animal testing, ingredients, or packaging. In the consulting world, we talk about this in terms of materiality, or what matters most to your business and industry. Companies that engage in this type of greenwashing are pointing at things that are not material to their product or industry. For example, a company could claim that its products don't contain a certain chemical, when in reality, that chemical is outlawed for all products. When the customer doesn't know that and a brand calls specific attention to it, it can be incredibly misleading. To put it in perspective, it's just as irrelevant as a car company claiming, our products are never tested on animals. Hearing that, we're all probably like, yeah, duh. But when it comes to things like chemicals and cleaning products, how many of us would actually know which chemicals are federally banned across the board? If you put enough syllables in it, even I'd probably take you at your word and not whip out my phone in aisle 7 to fact check you. Beyond the absurd examples, though, this can also be seen in fluffing up claims, like putting both no animal testing and cruelty free on your packaging. They mean the same thing, but consumers are trained to think that more claims on the label means more benefits, and they might gravitate towards a product that has redundant statements on it. You can imagine how making a ton of irrelevant claims to grab the attention of a shopper could quickly get out of control. Next, let's talk about misdirection. This is where companies make one small part of their product eco-friendly and try to capitalize on it. Packaging is a major focal point of this, especially with the rise of e-commerce. It's a really easy target for this kind of greenwashing because almost everything is shipped in a cardboard box that was made from recycled materials. But brands can try to capitalize on this by saying, yes, we know our products are not recyclable. They're bottled in virgin plastics. They're manufactured in countries where we can exploit cheap labor and shipped all over the world in planes, trains, boats, trucks that use fossil fuels. But look, we shipped it to you in a recycled cardboard box. Yay us. I'm not saying don't tackle your sustainability goals bit by bit, but this becomes a slippery slope if the strategy ends with this one initiative. It's not enough to simply ship your products in recycled cardboard boxes, and it doesn't absolve you of any further responsibility. Another example of misdirection is when brands point to planting trees or donating to charity with a portion of profits. Again, I'm not saying that they should stop doing that, but planting trees and building schools doesn't get at the root problem. You can plant all the trees you want, but if you're still selling products bottled in virgin plastic that ends up in landfill, I'm gonna have a problem with your brand. It's the equivalent of buying a new plant for your home when you haven't taken the trash out in 3 years. Carbon offset projects are great, and yes, we absolutely should be planting more trees, but not in place of getting a hold on our waste problems. It's not an either or situation. We need to be doing both. Next up, let's talk about vagueness, or as I like to call it, instructions unclear. And this is when brands slap words like eco-friendly, environmentally friendly, non-toxic, biodegradable on their products without backing it up and explaining how. So my favorite example of this are those Air Plus bags, those little air pouches that you get in your packages. They actually say things like reduce, reuse, recycle on them, and the irony is not lost on me. Anyone who has received a package with approximately 30 of these knows that there is no reducing, reusing, or recycling happening. They also have the little triangle recycling symbol on them that simply says stored drop off. I, for one, have not been able to find a store to drop them off at in my city. Allegedly, there's one at my local mall, and I have actively sought it out and haven't found it. So if it is there, they've done a really good job of making it easily accessible and super visible to everyone. In this category of instructions unclear, I want to talk about my biggest pet peeve in the world, compostable packaging. If you're new to this channel, buckle up because I have a lot of thoughts on compostable packaging. And if you are not new to this channel, I'm sorry because this is not the first, second, third, or fourth time I've talked about it. When I talk about compostable packaging, I'm talking about the cups, the straws, the plates, the mailer bags, the packaging peanuts, all of it. And for me, this all comes down to an access issue. The number of people that have access to and actually engage in backyard composting is pretty low. Not to mention, flooding your backyard composter with all of this packaging slows down the overall process significantly. Compost should be filled with organic matter: kitchen scraps, leftovers, yard clippings, the bouquet of flowers that you should have thrown out a week ago. That's what you should be putting in your compost. Saturating it with compostable packaging isn't going to give you the nutrient rich soil that you want to be putting back into your garden or yard. And if you're not blessed with the backyard or at home compost system, you're likely relying on municipal and industrial composting services. In the US, only around 185 cities pick up food waste at the curb for composting. Fewer than half of those also accept compostable packaging. Most industrial composters say they don't want it, and this is for a variety of reasons that include the challenge of trying to sort out what is compostable, figuring out what the material content of that packaging is, how it's going to impact their soil output, and how inevitably regular plastic finds its way into that compost pile. When you open it up beyond food and yard waste, sorting through all of that costs time and labor that industrial composters just don't want to deal with. It's so much easier to just reject it altogether. So while I appreciate the intention behind using a compostable mailer in place of a cardboard box, I can't compost it. I also can't recycle it because compostable materials compromise recycled material output and then makes it unsellable. So my only remaining option is to put it in my trash and send it off to landfill. Anyways, I promised myself this would not be another 15-minute rant about compostable packaging, so let's move on, but hopefully you get the point. A lot of this falls under what I call unintentional greenwashing. I more often than not believe that these brands have good intentions but didn't consider the systems in which they're operating. Personally, I think it can be one of the most dangerous forms of greenwashing because it's such an easy trap. It's really tough to avoid. In the US, recycling is incredibly fragmented and composting accessibility is severely lacking. As a national or international brand, it's so hard to find a single packaging solution that will work across the board. It absolutely sucks when you've invested a ton of time and a ton of resources into trying to be more sustainable, only to realize that you're unintentionally doing more harm than good. The last type of greenwashing we'll talk about is no accountability. And this is when a brand creates their own certification to put on products without being verified by a third party. In the US, we don't have a ton of policy or regulation on green certifications. It's all done on a voluntary basis, and we're struggling to even set industry benchmarks. A lot of this comes down to the very nature of capitalism and the preference for competition over collaboration. But when a brand creates their own certification and does not have that certification verified by a neutral third party, things start getting incredibly dicey. There are over 200 green certifications available in the US alone, and it's unreasonable to expect the average consumer to know which ones are legit and which ones are imposters. Ecolabel Index has put together a database of all the eco labels in the US, and I'll link it below for anyone who wants to bookmark it for easy reference. And yes, things are slowly changing, and we're seeing more pressure on brands from ESG investors, as well as the early start of policy and regulation. But it's going to be a long journey of implementing accountability measures for brands and increasing consumer awareness and education. So, what can brands do? I mean, we've talked about all the pitfalls and challenges, but that wasn't to deter you from becoming a more sustainable business. It just means that you've got to be careful and thoughtful in how you do it. This morning, I read a quote from Tananarive Due that I think fits perfectly here. We cannot become so jaded that we lose joy in everything because the flaws loom too large. The journey is the work, and the work is the journey. It's not enough to slap up a happy Earth Day message on your socials. There's real work to be done, and it's hard work, but big impact only comes from big, thoughtful change. I thought I'd share some of my best tips for brands that are hoping to avoid the greenwashing traps. First, don't lie. And that should be a given whether we're talking about sustainability or any part of your business or brand. That brief uptick in sales is really not worth the long term damage that you're doing to your reputation. Next is examine your supply chain, both upstream and downstream. And that means looking at what works for your manufacturing and distribution processes, but also considering what kind of access to recycling and composting your end users have. My third tip is to set realistic goals. And I'm a firm believer that doing less harm is better than doing nothing at all. Zero waste is a journey. Nobody is doing it perfectly. And if you're investing in more sustainable and therefore more expensive packaging solutions, but they're ending up in landfill, what is the point? My fourth tip is to be transparent with your customers, but also your competitors. These changes require heavy investments of time and money, and we really should be using that pre competitive space. By pooling resources, your entire industry can solve a problem much faster and in a much more cost effective way. Remember that polybags aren't a problem unique to your business, it's an industry wide problem. My last tip for brands is to advocate. Be a part of the policy changes and regulations coming your way. We know we're going to need better infrastructure, better systems, better education to create a truly sustainable world. Getting involved in those policy discussions not only ensures that your voice as a brand is heard, but it shows your customers that you're an active participant in building a better world. The buck doesn't stop at brands. As consumers, we also have a responsibility to vote with our dollars and vote with our votes. Where you spend your money matters, who and what you vote for matters. There is great power in collective action. And I hope that even though Earth Day has come and gone, you continue to think about the impact we collectively have on our planet. We have the power and the responsibility to hold brands accountable to the claims that they're making, and brands have a responsibility to do better. Hopefully, you found the information in this episode interesting and learned something you didn't already know. As always, if you'd like to dig deeper into this topic, I'll include links in the description box below here on YouTube. If you liked this episode, please hit subscribe, leave a comment, or share it with a friend. And if you've got some outrageous examples of greenwashing that you're dying to share, hit me up on Instagram so we can scream in agony together. Until next time, my fellow Earth nerds, ciao!